My name is Scott Wegener, and I am a comic book artist and creator, probably most well known for Atomic Robo, though I've worked on a few things for Marvel and had another creator-owned book called Killer Demons. I got into comics completely by accident. I was working at a job that had nothing to do with comics or anything creative, and was kind of unhappy with it. And a friend of mine asked me to do a pinup for an anthology he was putting together. Someone sees the pinup, and then they want me to do a 4-page story for it, so I did that. And one thing led to another, and that turned into working on the first issue of Killer Demons with Christopher Yost. But it all just kind of started falling into place. Brian Clevenger found me and said, hey, I have this idea for this crazy robot who has all these adventures, and I think I did Killer Demons first, but Atomic Robo came out before it did, and somewhere in with those two first issues, I also got a call from Marvel Comics, who asked me to do a couple of fill-in issues on Punisher War Journal. In fact, I hung up on them the first time they called me. They're like, this is so-and-so, Audrey Sitterson from Marvel Comics, I'm looking for an artist. And I was like, yeah, right. Thought it was one of my friends being clever, and then he calls back. He's like, no, really, I do work at Marvel, and can you do 2 issues in 6 weeks? And I was like, oh yeah, of course, no problem. So that actually got us through a really weird period, and then right after that is when Atomic Robo dropped and things started taking off with that. Well, I guess it would be Dr. Atomic Robo Tesla would be his technical name, but that's kind of a mouthful for the cover. Atomic Robo. So you take Indiana Jones, Captain America, the Rocketeer, Buckaroo Banzai, cram them into a 5-foot-tall, 480-pound robot who wears pants. Bam, that's Atomic Robo. He was built in 1923 by Nikola Tesla. He is still alive in 2015. He is your classic everyman character, and the books chronicle his adventures, but in absolutely no order. So we hop around through the decades of his life, and each book is sort of a little homage to a certain genre or a time period, and you can read them in any order you want. It does not matter, because we don't tell them in any order. We got a lot of comparisons to Hellboy when we first came out. You have this super strong working Joe schmuck who is fighting all this crazy stuff. And instead of having Nazis and ghosts, we have Nazis and super science, I guess. But that's this classic trope of this working schmuck. Indiana Jones, Mad Max is a more recent example. It's just these poor doofuses who are fairly competent, but are basically just kicked from page 1 until page 22 of an issue, and you love watching them get smacked around because eventually they're gonna come back and land on top. Jackie Chan's another great example of that. If you watch any of his old movies, he's always getting his butt kicked, and it makes him so human that you can relate to him, because I'm sure in any of the situations that we portray in the comic, I would be under a table and hands on head, probably crying a little bit. So you can kind of relate to that the abuse that he takes. So he's a little bit of all of us, I think. So one of the things that we've always strived to achieve with Atomic Robo is to never create any barrier to entry for new readers to our material. And the way that Marvel and DC does this is with a reboot or with a big event, the big thing that's going to change everything until next month when it all resets anyway to how it was before. I personally feel like it's hard to feel invested in a character when nothing is ever going to happen to that character. But every time something happens in the world, it happens forever. For anyone who's been reading them, Tesladyne Industries, which is Robo's scientific think tank company, gets invaded by this government, shadow government agency called Majestic 12, and is basically destroyed and taken over by them. And that's it. That's forever. The people who get hurt or killed in that, they're gone for good. Things cannot go back to how they were with that. The trauma you inflict on the characters matters. So even though every time that when you start a Robo book, pretty much Robo's probably going to win and come out okay on the other side, things are going to happen to him along the way that are going to stay with him and have a meaningful impact on him indefinitely. It's one of the great things, and also one of the frustrating things about being your own boss, especially when your studio is in your house, is that you are always at work. And just getting Robo done is more than a full-time job. It's 50, 55, 60 hours a week sometimes. But you get invested in a thing that's your own in a way that you can't get invested in other people's stuff. I've always had a lot of fun on the books I've done with other people or for other people, but I don't feel any emotional. I don't feel any emotional investment, and I don't feel any real creative ownership of that. Like the 2 issues of Punisher I did, that was a hoot, but I don't own the Punisher. Whereas with Robo, it's always this very personal thing, and I can and because I can insert little bits of myself into the book, and know that they're not going to get edited out or messed with. I don't know. There's just something to that. And then I know there are plenty of people who just, their dream book is to draw Spider-Man or something like that. And looking back to like the comics or the things that I loved as a kid, like, yeah, it'd be fun to work on all of them, but I'd never think of that as my dream job. Like, I want to put my own stamp on something, and it may not be as good as Spider-Man, and that's fine, but it's my own at least. And yeah, so I don't know. I get more out of that. The very first issue of Atomic Robo came out in October of 2007. To a pretty surprising reaction, we figured no one would be interested in it because we were just making a comic book that we thought only appealed to the 2 of us. But by the time those 6 issues came out, we were already seeing things that we didn't like in the direct market. Diamond was set up to move massive amounts of books for Marvel and DC. And over the years, everyone else has just been kind of shoehorned in wherever they can. I know they do their best, but just because of the nature of the beast, the smaller books and smaller publishers sometimes kind of get lost in the mix. And Brian obviously had years of experience with his webcomic, so we had always wanted to make it as easy as possible to get it into people's hands. So now Atomic Robo is all online at atomic-robo.com. In 1 week, more eyes were on our work that had been on our work for 8 years before that. So obviously not all of those people gave us money or bought something, but you only need a much smaller fraction of that large number to chip in to suddenly see that it makes a lot more sense for an individual creator to go that route. And for the last 6 years, anytime a person has approached me at a convention and say, how do I get into comics? My answer has always been, go webcomics. Brian Clevenger, as reference for anyone who doesn't know, is, my wife refers to him as my other wife. He's my creative partner in Atomic Robo. I think I already said this, but he's the writer. We were kind of like separated at birth in a lot of weird ways. Well, actually, when Brian Clevenger first approached me with Atomic Robo, I was not sure how I felt about the concept, actually. The way he pitched it was, really vaguely, and I didn't have any idea in my head of what like the aesthetic of this book would be or what direction he wanted to take it in. I was vaguely familiar with 8-Bit Theater, his webcomic, so obviously comedy was going to be a big part of it. But it actually took the 2 of us weeks and weeks of throwing ideas back and forth at each other. And as we were doing that, we started realizing that like the same creative touchstones that I reach for are often what he reaches for also. So Brian and I are both kind of history and science nerds. We take great pleasure out of taking these strange things from reality that we find and twisting them just a little bit to give them a little kind of a sci-fi edge to them and working them into Atomic Robo. And then when we're doing dumb things like there were giant ants in the first book, we make fun of the fact that there are giant ants because you can't have giant ants. So Robo's going on and on about, why do we even have a square cube law? Like, what's the point? Atomic Robo is like this big toy chest of all the stuff that inspired me or got me excited when I was a kid. So yeah, it's a universe that's constantly in motion and very kinetic and always changing, and yet it integrates these elements of history and science that we are very much into in the real world. And so yeah, I don't know, it's great.
Thank you for watching Beyond the Longbox.
If you enjoy the show and would like to see more, please hit subscribe, and we'll continue to bring you the best in comics.
Worship me!